Welcome back to another video of the pulsating biology for the IGSC chapter number 3, that is the movement into and out of the cell. We have discussed most of the topics in the previous video. For today's video, we have a very important topic, that is the active transport. Active transport is a form of process that is required by majority of the processes and the metabolic processes to take place. Well, what is new about the active transport? The fun fact about the active transport that it require and it works against the concentration gradient. Against the concentration gradient. And how does it do so? It do so with the help of an energy. Now we need to learn how it does it generate energy, or how does it get energy in order to perform the active transport. This is what we are going to learn in this video. And in last, you'll be getting to know what how does the active transport take place and exactly what does it mean. Well, the exact definition of active transport is the movement of molecules from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. Let's write it down. The exact definition for the active transport is the movement of material to a membrane against the concentration gradient. Against the concentration gradient. The key word here is against the concentration gradient, which you need to keep in your mind. And the movement of molecules, the movement of the material take place from the low concentration to the higher concentration. How does it do so? Let's take an example. Let's say this is the cell membrane. We're not going to draw the exact cell membrane, but this is the rough structure of how the cell membrane takes place. This is the carrier protein, and these are the basically intrinsic protein and extrinsic protein that we all know that is placed in the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane. So this is the example of a cell membrane. It contains these proteins. Now what are these proteins? These proteins are called the carrier protein. The first thing that you need to remember about active transport is that it works against the concentration gradient. The next thing you need to learn about is that it has carrier protein. Now, what is meant by the carrier protein? Let's take a exact definition of carrier protein. That says carrier protein is basically a kind of protein that is found embedded in the cell, and like you can see, so this is embedded into the cell. How what is the carrier protein basically work? It allows the molecules to pass from the region of low concentration to the region of high concentration. This is what basically carrier protein do. It helps out the molecules to pass the region of concentration between the lower concentration and higher concentration. It functions similar to a pore, or allows the diffusion of small ions or water molecules through them. These are basically the lipoproteins. You can say most of the carrier proteins are lipoproteins and are synthesized in the rough endoplasmic reticulum. This is some of the extra information that you need to learn. So this is how it works. Region from the lower concentration to the region of higher concentration with the help of a carrier protein. All right. How does the channel protein or the carrier protein is basically helping us form the ATP? Well, this is another concept that you need to learn, is that the channel protein has the ATP building site basically. How does the channel protein? It has the building site of ATP. Now, what is meant by the building site of ATP? It means it can help us to transform ATP the assemblage transfers ATP into ADP with an extra phosphate group, and also with the release of energy. In this way, we get the energy to basically perform the process of the active transport. So the channel protein has a building site where the ATP is basically binded and attached. Once it is binded and attached, it releases the energy in turn. How so? The ATP is converted into the ADP, which is the triphosphate is converted into the diphosphate when one of the phosphate group is basically released. In such so, the energy is formed. This is how the process of active transport takes place. We need to learn a bit more about it. Let's discuss active transport in more detail. Like we have discussed earlier, that how the ATP is basically converted into ADP with the release of the phosphate group and also with the release of the energy. How does it is done? So we have already discussed that ADP. This is a adenosine triphosphate which converted into the adenosine diphosphate, and the phosphate group is released. When one group is released, it basically results in the release of an energy. Now, what is the work of this energy? It is required to change the shape in a piece of a molecule or ion from lower concentration and then throw them into a higher concentration. Like I've told, so this is the similar structure of the cell membrane. How does this energy work is that the molecules that are in the lower concentration, this energy helps to transfer the molecules in the lower concentration to the higher concentration. In such way, the active transport is basically taking place. So energy plays a very important role in the active transport since it works against the concentration gradient. The concentration gradient cannot work in the absence of an energy. It requires energy in order to transfer the molecules and keep the molecules from the lower concentration to the molecules in the higher concentration. Basically, to throw them into the higher concentration. In such phenomena, the kind of a protein that is found embedded in the plasma membrane, that is the carrier protein. This carrier protein helps us to generate the energy and perform the active transport. You must also remember that ATP. Why does the energy is performed? Because the ATP is the energy currency of the cell. This is a very common statement that we have often heard, that ATP is the energy currency of the cell, and due to this energy currency, many of the processes take place. This is what you need to learn about the equation of the active transport in order to learn the process of the active transport. In order to learn about the active transport in more details, let's discuss the three main vital points of the active transport. To give it a summary or to give it a review, it takes place against the concentration gradient. Number one is that it takes place against the concentration gradient. These three vital points will help us understand the active transport in a summarized way. Takes us against the concentration gradient. The concentration gradient is basically the region of the difference of concentration between a high concentration and the low concentration. The second point says that it uses specific protein in the cell membrane, that is the carrier proteins. That means the carrier proteins are used in the process of the active transport, which is the special protein, which is also known as the special protein in the language of biology. The third pointer says that it needs energy. Energy is required. It needs for the process of the active transport. It needs energy, which is basically finalized by the carrier protein that forms of the gives us and releases the energy by the process of respiration. By the process of respiration. We also know that the respiration can be of two types, the aerobic and the anaerobic. Let's discuss it in detail. It is of aerobic and anaerobic. The aerobic mean that is in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic means in the absence of oxygen. So these are the major pointers that can help you understand active transport in a summarized manner, that it takes place against the concentration gradient. Number one pointer. Number two pointer says that the carrier proteins plays a very important role in, because they basically gives off the energy that helps us to transfer the ATP into the ADP with a group of the phosphate that helps us release the energy and helps us perform the process of active transport. Well, this is the second pointer. The third pointer says that it needs energy by the process of respiration. The respiration takes place in the cell, which gives off the energy that is used in the process of the active transport. The respiration are of two types. It can be aerobic or it can be anaerobic. The amount of energy that is released varies in the process of the aerobic and also in the process of the anaerobic. This is how you can learn about the active transport in detail.